melden sich alle, die glauben, dass auch nur ein Riss in das Gefüge unserer einzigen Bewegung gekommen sei. Sie steht fest, so wie dieser Block hier.
Berlin, April 30th, 1945. The city is dying. Smoke rises where streets once bustled with laughter and song. The heart of a once mighty empire beats its final broken rhythm. Above ground, the Red Army pushes street by street. Below, civilians crowd into bunkers, shadows clutching shadows, waiting for a world to end. The sound never stops. Shells, footsteps, collapsing stone. Somewhere beneath the Reich chancellery, the man who began this war listens to the echoes of his own downfall. Berlin is encircled, a fortress without a future. The 1,000-year Reich has lasted 12. The war's final act has begun. Every soul inside this ruined city will play their part in it. And the empire that rose in fire will now die in fire. Here in Berlin. Earlier, the world watched a different Berlin. Flags unfurling under a sea of light. A nation humiliated by defeat found a voice that promised pride, power, destiny.
Very quickly, he turned Germany into a one-party state. So first of all, he made sure to eliminate the influence and power of the German political left. So the Socialist Party and the Communist Party, for a start, were banned. But over a short amount of time as well, the Nazi Party was the only legal party too.
Eventually, in January 1933, he becomes Chancellor. Now, don't forget, Chancellor in Germany, and this still remains today, is not, at the time, the head of state. The head of state is the president. So it's the Chancellor, though, who has the real executive power. In order to take as much power as he can, he's also going to have to make himself head of state. And that really becomes an opportunity for him when Hindenburg dies, and he's able to take on the role of both president and chancellor and kind of create this new role for himself, and that is the role of Führer, the German word for leader. This has become a totalitarian state, and Hitler can say to the German people, you voted for it. It's a con, and it's a con that worked.
Adolf Hitler believed himself to be the savior Germany had been waiting for. He used democracy not as a promise, but as a weapon, a means to rise and then to destroy it. His vision was absolute, a world built upon the myth of the Aryan race, the so-called master race of pure Germans. To preserve that illusion, he enforced laws of control and cruelty, sterilizing those deemed unworthy.
You have a lot of laws being passed, unsurprisingly, to give the Nazis more power. But also you've got a rise in the apparatus of state terror. You have a thing called the Gestapo, now completely notorious, but that stands for secret state police. But this is a new type of policeman. It's a policeman who is in plain clothes. It's a policeman who recruits informers, on every block, on every street, and every block of flats, in order for the people to effectively police themselves. And of course, this becomes an incredibly important part of the Nazi apparatus.
In October 1933, Hitler withdrew from the League of Nations, a gesture of defiance and a declaration of intent. The rebuilding of the German army had begun, and with it, the machinery of war.
He had the idea of a very aggressive and expansionist foreign policy, and essentially this idea of might over morality, so force over anything rational, I suppose, in a way, force in terms of foreign affairs. And of course, the League of Nations was designed to promote peace and to enhance security, of course, too. And so this was why Hitler wanted to remove Germany from it.
The crowds cheered. They saw rebirth, not ruin. They did not see the horror to come. 1939. On the 1st of September, Hitler invaded Poland, and Europe caught its breath. The world had witnessed aggression before, but this was madness unmasked.
In September 39, Hitler invades Poland, along with Stalin. Soviet Russia also invades Poland at the same time. But what the world remembers is the fact that Hitler invaded Poland, and a couple of days later, the British declare war on Germany.
The German population, because of Hitler's popularity, and even though they had experienced the horrors of the First World War and the trench warfare of the First World War and all of the shell shock and everything that went with it, because he was so popular, they might not have been delighted to go to war in September 1939, but they went along with it.
Hitler called it Blitzkrieg, lightning war, a strike so fast, so merciless that the enemy had no time to fight back. He promised his followers a war of annihilation, no pity, no pause, no mercy. In just 6 weeks, Poland was crushed, cities burned, tens of thousands executed. 2 million Jews fell under Nazi rule, their fate already written in the silence of camps not yet built. Europe descended into turmoil, yet the storm did not stop. The speed of these victories shocked the world. The Blitzkrieg appeared unstoppable. City after city fell before the Allies could regroup or understand the scale of what they faced. Governments across Europe were thrown into crisis. Diplomats fled capitals. Resistance movements formed in secret, and in London, Winston Churchill understood the danger with absolute clarity. If Britain fell, there would be nothing left to stop Nazi domination of the continent. For the Allies, this was no longer a border dispute or a regional conflict. In 1940, Hitler's armies swept through Denmark, Norway, Holland, Belgium, and finally, France. The continent bowed beneath the swastika. Germany stood untouchable, and the world braced for a war that would devour generations. April 1945. Along the Oder and Neisse rivers, just 50 miles east of Berlin, the Red Army gathers for the final assault. By this time, Hitler had already withdrawn from the world above. In January, he retreated into the Führer bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, a concrete tomb from which he would command the end of his empire.
Ultimately, Hitler is now being squeezed in a massive, massive continental vice. He's got Stalin from the east, he's got the Americans and the British and other allies from the west. That is just going to be absolutely unstoppable.
2.5 million Soviet soldiers stand ready, their artillery stretching for miles, their goal clear: take the Nazi capital, end the war. April 16th, 4:30 a.m. At dawn, the sky ignites. 20,000 guns thunder at once, the largest barrage in European history. The horizon burns red as Marshal Zhukov's First Belarusian Front begins its push towards Berlin. German defenders, remnants of the once mighty Wehrmacht, now joined by exhausted Volkssturm militias, dig into the Seelow Heights, their last line before the capital. But they are outnumbered 10-1. The ground itself trembles beneath the Soviet advance. For 3 days, the hills are swallowed by fire. April 18th, 3 p.m. To the south, the First Ukrainian Front fans into the open country. The town of Frost has fallen, and from its ashes, the Red Army surges forward, a tide of men and steel rolling toward Berlin's southern approaches. Gordov's 3rd Guards Army drives northeast. Rabelko's and Lelashenko's tank armies thunder beside them, cutting past through burning villages and splintered woods. Dust clouds rise high enough to blot out the sun. April 19th, the 4th day of battle. At dawn, the 1st Belarusian Front tears through the final German line along the Seelow Heights. What remains of the Wehrmacht breaks and scatters, no longer an army, but fragments of one. Behind them, Berlin lies open. Only wrecked formations and empty defenses stand between the Soviets and the capital. By midday, Soviet columns are driving a wedge straight through the heart of Germany's defense. Army Group Vistula to the north, Army Group Centra to the south, both torn apart, their communications lost. For the German High Command, the map is beginning to dissolve. The front no longer exists, only pockets of resistance, isolated and desperate. By afternoon, the Soviet trap begins to close. The Belarusian and Ukrainian fronts converge west of Frankfurt on the Oder, sealing the fate of the German Ninth Army. Caught between the pincers, tens of thousands of men are encircled in the forest near Halbe. They will fight to break free, but few will live to see it. The breakthrough comes at a terrible price. The Soviets have lost nearly 3,000 tanks, 700 in the Seelow Heights alone. The road to Berlin is open, but it is paved with wreckage. Still, they press forward. The thunder of artillery moves westward, hour by hour, closer to the city that will soon become the graveyard of the Reich. But how did it come to this? How did the Soviet Union, once distant, divided, and brutalized, become the army that is now standing at Germany's gates? To understand the final assault on Berlin, we must return to the beginning of the war, to the pact that was signed, and to the betrayal that shattered Europe. (1940). Once, the Reich was unstoppable. From Poland to Paris, the world watched lightning strike in every direction. Hitler's new art of war, blitzkrieg, shattered Europe's old defenses in weeks. By the summer of 1940, France had fallen, Britain stood alone, and Nazi banners stretched from the North Sea to the Balkans.
All of these attacks were very sort of quick and easy victories for the Nazis, and they just fed Hitler's success and popularity.
To his generals, it seemed the world itself might soon kneel. But for Hitler, victory only bred obsession. Even as bombs fell on London, he looked east, toward the vast fields of the Soviet Union. He saw not an ally in Stalin, but a rival to be erased. His war of conquest was about to become a war of ideology. 1941. On June 22nd, under the codename Operation Barbarossa, 3 million German soldiers crossed a front nearly 2,000 miles wide. It was the largest invasion in human history. Tanks rolled through the dawn mist. Aircraft filled the skies, and the Wehrmacht advanced faster than any army had before.
Had Hitler stopped after he had successfully conquered France and the Low Countries, and not decided in June 1941 that he was going to invade this really quite big country called Russia, he may have stayed in power. But in June 41, he has this enormous roll of the dice. It's the ultimate gamble. I'm going to invade Russia. I'm going to get to Moscow before winter. And so he thinks he's going to be able to do it. He's built up his armed forces. Stalin's had this pact with Hitler for years, and he's thinking Hitler's never going to invade. Hitler goes straight in, June 1941, and again, the Blitzkrieg, Operation Barbarossa, as it was called in this instance, was tremendously successful. And initially, the forces just went through Russia like a knife through butter. And they slaughtered, pillaged in their wake. This was an absolutely a dazzling piece of offensive warfare.
Villages vanished overnight. Soviet divisions collapsed beneath the speed of the attack. Within weeks, Minsk, Smolensk, and Kyiv were engulfed. Millions of Red Army soldiers were captured or killed. To the world, it seemed the Reich might truly be invincible. But Russia was not Europe. The distances were endless. For every mile gained, the German advance bled itself dry.
What Stalin's got is a lot of room to fight in, because he can retreat and retreat and retreat and retreat, and you've still got thousands of miles of Russia behind you that you can fall back on. But also what Stalin does is he's very good at regrouping and getting his forces back together. Germans use a lot of over-designed tanks, over-designed uniforms, over-designed weapons. What the Russians are good at doing is just getting things together in a kind of makeshift way, but that works.
Supply lines stretched hundreds of miles across open plains. Vehicles froze in the night. Ammunition ran low. Fuel tankers couldn't keep up. Engines seized. Weapons jammed. The Wehrmacht had been built for fast, decisive victories, not a grinding war across a continent. And the deeper they pushed, the more resistance hardened. Villages that fell in a day became battlefields for a week. Every forest hid rifle fire. Every town cost blood. For Winston Churchill, the invasion of the Soviet Union was not just another offensive. It was an opening. He saw Stalin a brutal dictator, yes, but also the enemy of his enemy. In that desperate summer of 1941, pragmatism triumphed over ideology. Churchill reached out across old suspicions, offering alliance in the face of a greater evil. The British and Soviets, once divided by politics, now bound by survival, stood together against Hitler. And when the United States joined soon after, the balance of the war began to shift. Then came Stalingrad, a battle that would signify the beginning of the reverse of Germany's advances. 1942. In the summer, German armies struck south toward the Volga River, desperate for one last symbol of dominance. They reached the city that bore Stalin's name and began a siege that would last half a year. Street by street, room by room, both sides fought in hell itself. The Volga ran red. the air turned to dust and flame. But the city did not fall.
What Stalin does is to order the Red Army to hold Stalingrad at all costs. And this becomes one of the most brutal urban combats in human history. I mean, really close quarters fighting, almost hand to hand. You've got direct assaults on civilians and air raids. It is just the most brutal form of urban warfare.
In the winter of 1943, the Soviets encircled the German Sixth Army. Cut off, starving, frozen, 9,000 survivors surrendered. An empire that had conquered a continent was now fighting simply to survive. From the ashes of Stalingrad, a new tide began to rise, one that would carry all the way to Berlin. April 20th, 1945. As the sun rises over Berlin, the first Soviet shells arc through the morning haze. They land with a sound that will now not stop for almost 2 weeks. It is Hitler's 56th birthday, and the gift from the reaches. Vanish, and the people of Berlin understand the war has come home.
The first half of 1945 is probably the darkest 6 months in Germany's history, because it's being invaded by the Russians, the Red Army from the east, and you've got the other allies coming through from the west. And it's the Russians who reach Berlin first. And when they reach Berlin, it's a city in rubble, it's a city in flames, it's a city in chaos, it's a city in which squads of marauding loyal Nazis are going around hanging people who are not taking part in the resistance to the city. You then got some Nazis committing suicide. It is the most benighted, appalling place you can imagine. And you've got the Soviet army literally raping and pillaging this city.
Beneath the ruins of Berlin, life has retreated underground. Families crowd into U-Bahn tunnels, clutching blankets and ration tins. The city that once marched in triumph now cowers in darkness. The air smells of oil, sweat, and candle smoke. Above them, Soviet artillery rains down, each explosion sending dust from the ceilings like falling ash.
Once the Red Army came into German territory in 1945, then Hitler's position as this infallible ruler and leader really not only became to be called into question, but really came to its end, because the Soviet troops were very vengeful. They were retaliating for all the terrible brutalities and atrocities that the Nazis and the German army had put into place in Soviet territory. What it meant was that they were coming closer and closer on their journey westwards to Berlin, and eventually Hitler and a very small inner circle around him had to retreat to his bunker, his underground bunker.
20 feet below the Reich Chancellery, the Führer bunker hums with generators and fear. Typists tap through the night. Officers whisper over maps that no longer make sense. The air is heavy, stale, the weight of defeat pressing down like the earth itself. Hitler paces the concrete floor, his hands trembling, his gaze unfocused.
This is a war brought about by Hitler, and this is a war that Hitler has fought for too long, and he's fighting it to the death. And he's fighting it to the death of the people who he supposedly loves. And he no longer loves them by the end of the war. And he says that basically the German people don't deserve him, the German people don't deserve Germany, and everybody should fight to the death because basically, they don't deserve to be alive because they failed him. Classic narcissistic thinking. The world is for him, and he's not there for the world.
Outside, the Soviets are closing in from the Oder, from the north, from the south, a noose tightening with every passing hour. April 21st. Each day brings new fragments of reality. The front line is now 5 miles from the Chancellery. Orders are sent to divisions that no longer exist. Hitler still speaks of phantom armies, forces that live only on his maps. Those who question him are dismissed or ignored. Those who stay learn silence. Loyalty has become a ritual, not a choice. On the streets above, Berliners move like ghosts. Children carry water through rubble. Doctors perform surgeries by candlelight. They no longer speak of victory, only of endurance. In the distance, the Soviets move from block to block, their advance relentless, their vengeance absolute. April 22nd. At his afternoon situation conference, Hitler's composure finally cracks. He erupts into a storm of fury and despair. His plans for defiance are gone. His armies are gone. Around him, his generals stand silent as he rages, sobs, and declares the war lost. He will not flee. He will stay here until the end and take his own life. After the outburst, the bunker falls into a strange calm. Secretaries write his final orders. Goebbels whispers promises of victory to his children upstairs. Eva Braun pours champagne and pretends it is another evening in the Chancellery. As the Red Army encircles the city, the Western Front is stirring too. Far from the ruins of Berlin, across the Channel, another army prepares to cross into Europe. While Berlin collapses inward, the tide elsewhere begins to rise. The future of the war and of the world will soon be decided on another shore. As Berlin trembles beneath Soviet fire, far to the west, another front is waiting to be born. The world holds its breath again, this time not for invasion, but for liberation. (1944).
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. We will accept nothing less than full victory. And let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.
In the gray hours before dawn on June 6th, thousands of ships crowded the English Channel. Inside them was the largest armada ever assembled. 150,000 soldiers, sailors, and airmen preparing to storm the continent. For years, the Allies had fought from the air and the sea. Now, they were coming ashore. The code name was simple: Operation Overlord. To the men waiting in the dark, it meant something else entirely: a gamble with their lives. At 6:30 a.m., the first landing craft ground against the beaches of Normandy, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword. Each name would be remembered, each one bought with blood. The sea turned to chaos. Waves of men wading through gunfire, dragging the wounded through the tide. Entire units vanished in minutes. Yet somehow, hour by hour, the line moved forward. By nightfall, the beachhead held. The Allies were back in Europe. Hitler's empire had been breached. From the beaches, the Allies surged inland. The liberation of France began not with parades, but with the grinding rhythm of attrition. The Battle of Normandy had begun. Weeks of close combat that would begin to break the German hold on France.
After the Allies successfully land on D-Day and start using those beaches to, get tons and tons of men and material, into northern France, what now follows is the Battle of Normandy. And that is a very, very attritional, tough battle. And one of the reasons for that is because the Normandy countryside, the bocage as it's called, is sort of undulating, and it's got lots and lots of hedgerows you can hide behind. It is almost like urban warfare, but in the countryside. Lots of places to hide, lots of places for snipers, lots of ditches, lots of hedgerows, lots of woods, lots of copses. It's very, very difficult. And as a result, it becomes a very long and drawn out battle that's going to cost a lot of lives on both sides.
For every mile gained, the price was high. But this time, the retreat was German.
With two great amphibious landings, followed by one of the most powerful, most brilliantly executed military campaigns of history, the Allies round out their master plan for the liberation of France and the crushing of the German enemy in the West.
After weeks of fighting, Paris finally rose. On August 25th, the city erupted in celebration. The tricolor flew once more above the Arc de Triomphe. For the first time since 1940, freedom had a foothold on the continent.
The liberation of Paris is, of course, an absolutely symbolic moment for the Allied invasion. Hitler had ordered the Germans there to basically destroy the city, to flatten it, rather than let it fall into Allied hands. But the German garrison there realizes that as the Allies approach, they're not going to win, they're going to be encircled. What you might end up with is going to be a kind of siege, people are going to starve. And so, of course, when the Allies do go into Paris, and the Free French forces go into Paris, and General de Gaulle, the leader of the Free French, goes into Paris, this is a hugely symbolic moment. France had been humiliated by Hitler in 1940. Those images of Hitler posing near the Eiffel Tower, of course, represented utter capitulation. And so, for that swastika to come down off the Eiffel Tower and be replaced by the French tricolour was a hugely morale-boosting moment and really showed that D-Day and the tide of war were going the way of the Allies.
As Allied columns rolled eastward, Hitler's world began to shrink. The Western Front pushed toward the Rhine. The Eastern Front drove relentlessly from Poland. The Reich was being crushed between two storms. Yet even then, the cost was unimaginable. Tens of thousands fell in Normandy alone. In the skies over Germany, firestorms consumed cities night after night. Victory was coming, but it would not come gently. From the beaches of Normandy to the fields of France, the tide had turned. And as the Allies pushed toward Germany, the final chapter of the war was already being written, deep beneath the ruins of Berlin. April 23rd, 1945. The last road out is gone. The last hope buried. Hitler refuses to flee. He orders his people to fight to the death. Berlin is encircled. The Soviet fronts converge on the fortress of ruin, its defenders trapped between loyalty and survival. April 24th, 6 a.m. The Red Army is at the gates. After weeks of fighting through the Oder and Neisse, Soviet vanguards enter the southeastern suburbs of Berlin. Marshal Zhukov's 1st Belarusian Front presses from the east, Konev's 1st Ukrainian Front from the south. The 1st Soviet units cross into the city at Treptow Park in Adlershof, probing, testing, marking the way. Resistance is fierce. The streets are lined with barricades and tank traps, manned by soldiers and civilians alike. For Berlin, the battle has begun. 12 p.m. In the southern sector, the 8th Guards Army forces its way past Tempelhof. To the north, the 47th Army closes around Weissensee. German communication lines are failing. Orders go missing. Entire units disappear beneath the rubble. In the Führer bunker, Hitler refuses to believe the Soviets are already inside the city. Even his closest men were abandoning him. Göring tried to seize control. Himmler sought surrender. Acts Hitler called treason, signs that his empire was tearing itself apart from within. April 25th, 4 a.m. At dawn, the Soviet ring closes. The 1st Ukrainian Front links with the 1st Belarusian Front at Kietz, south of Berlin. The German capital is completely surrounded. To the west, elements of the 1st Ukrainian Front reach the Elbe near Torgau, linking with the Americans. April 26th, 10 a.m. The Soviets push deeper, their lines converging from all sides. The Spree becomes a front line, every bridge a battlefield. Tank brigades from the 1st Guards Army fight through Kreuzberg and Neukölln, block by block. Behind them, mortars pound the city center. The civilians are trapped between the fronts. Cellars are packed with families, their walls shaking with every impact. The air smells of plaster dust and smoke. April 27th, 3 p.m. The Ninth Army, south of the city, is surrounded in the Halby Pocket. They try to break west toward the Americans. The slaughter that lasts for days. Inside Berlin, General Weidling commands the city's defense, though his men are exhausted and cut off. Hitler orders him to hold the capital to the last bullet. There are no bullets left to spare. April 28th, 6 a.m. Soviet forward units of the 3rd Shock Army cross Alexanderplatz. The city of Berlin, once government, once power, is now reduced to a cratered maze of fire and stone. The last German reserves from the 18th Panzer Grenadiers and SS Nordland counterattack through the Tiergarten. They are pushed back within hours. 9 p.m. By nightfall, Soviet troops reach the Moltke Bridge. The bridge is mined, its approaches swept by machine gun fire. Engineers crawl forward under cover of smoke, diffusing explosives by hand. Somehow, it holds. The 150th Rifle Division crosses into the government district, a few hundred meters from the Reichstag. April 29th, 10 a.m. The Soviet artillery begins its final bombardment of the Reichstag and surrounding ministries. The building itself is now a fortress, garrisoned by nearly 1,000 SS and Wehrmacht troops. From the bunker, Hitler sends a final message to Field Marshal Keitel. Berlin will stand fast, but even his staff no longer believes him. 3 p.m. Inside the Reichstag, corridors filled with smoke and rubble. Soviet assault groups storm the ground floors, but are thrown back by machine gun nests. The battle rages through the night. Every stairwell, every room becomes a war of inches. April 30th, 4 a.m. Before dawn, more than 100 Soviet guns open up in unison. For 2 hours, the Reichstag and its surroundings are pounded into dust. Then, silence. The order goes out. Take it, whatever the cost. Infantry charge across open ground toward the Reichstag steps. Dozens fall before they reach the walls. Those who make it breach the main entrance under fire and begin clearing the building room by room. 10 a.m. In the streets around Wilhelmstrasse, the fighting is house to house. Soviet units press to within 200 meters of the Chancellery. The bunker lies directly beneath them, the heart of the collapsing Reich. Inside, Hitler's aides listen as artillery shakes the ceilings. The map table is covered in reports of defeat. Soviet troops are less than half a kilometer away. 1 p.m. In the ruins above, the Reichstag burns. Below, Hitler holds his final meeting. He knows the front is gone. He knows Berlin will fall within hours. The man who once dreamed of a 1,000-year empire now commands a city that will not survive the day.
He goes into his little kind of living room with his new bride, and they poison and shoot themselves. It's thought that Hitler's done both. He takes a little canister of cyanide and also shoots himself. and Eva Braun commits suicide by poisoning herself. Their bodies are then removed by some loyal SS men, his adjutant, and they are taken out in what passes now for a garden in the Reich Chancellery, but of course it's just a kind of pockmarked hellhole of artillery shells. And there they are, their bodies are burnt in this great kind of almost like a sort of Viking pyre, like a Viking longship going up.
The man who began this war has taken his own life. His empire has no future left to command. The news spreads quickly through corridors, command posts, and ruins. Some refuse to believe. Others already knew it was inevitable. Within days, the remaining German forces in Berlin surrendered to the Soviet army. A city once imagined as the capital of a 1,000-year Reich now lies broken, starving, and burned. Across Europe, the weapons fall silent. On May 8, 1945, the war in Europe is declared over. VE Day, the long night, has ended. But the world it leaves behind is forever changed. More than 70 million lives were lost, cities erased, families scattered, a continent scarred.
The enemy who drove all Europe into war has been finally overcome. But at this hour, when the dreadful shadow of war has passed far from our hearths and homes in these islands, we may at last make one pause for thanksgiving and then turn our thoughts to the tasks all over the world which peace in Europe brings with it.
And yet, from the ruins of Berlin, something begins. Not triumph, not celebration, but rebuilding, a reckoning with the past, a vow never to return to the darkness that led here. The fall of Berlin was not just the end of a war. It was the end of an age and the beginning of the world we live in now.